Put your seatbelts on and get ready for the ride. We're the freaking New York Jets, so we're built for this shit.
Hello, welcome to another episode of In the Trenches with Gang Green. I'm your host, Bubbs. Today is Monday, June 16th. Hopefully everybody's having a good day so far today. This is episode 556 of the In the Trenches with Gang Green podcast. I thank you, as always, for joining me. For those tuning in on YouTube, make sure to please like and subscribe. Of course, appreciate all of those tuning in on all the different audio podcast platforms. And today we've got some more New York Jets news to discuss. I wanted to open up today's podcast by discussing the New York Jets wide receiver 2 spot, as it seems Josh Reynolds is emerging and is the clear-cut favorite to win that job next to Garrett Wilson. We will break that down to open up today's program. And then I also want to get into Aaron Glenn. His first test as New York Jets head coach has been passed with flying colors. I want to discuss how Aaron Glenn's tenure, or I guess should say since getting hired in January, has gone so far, and get into one important factor that the Jets will be working on in training camp that Glenn spoke about last week when minicamp closed up. So we will break that down as well a little bit later on in the podcast. As always, though, before we begin, we've got to tell you about our podcast partners, starting with our friends over at BetUS, America's favorite online sportsbook. If you want to get in on any of the sports betting action, check out BetUS and use my link in the description of this video to get a 125% sign-up bonus on your first 3 deposits up to $2,000. Also, our friends over at SeatGeek, if you want any of the hottest tickets in sports or entertainment, check out SeatGeek and use my promo code BUBSONSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase and get yourself out to some awesome events. And of course, our friends over at Huga House, if you want any of their awesome selection of hats, sweatshirts, t-shirts, check them out and use code BUBS for 15% off any purchase and get yourself some awesome Huga House swag. So here we go, episode 556. Thank you as always for joining me. Appreciate the support so much here on a Monday program. Today, wanted to get into a couple different things here revolving around the New York Jets, starting with Josh Reynolds and the New York Jets wide receiver 2 spot, which has been a topic of conversation here throughout the offseason. Will the New York Jets add another receiver, right? Keenan Allen and Amari Cooper still out there, or will they stay put with what they have? Josh Reynolds, Lazard. Will Lazard even be on the roster when week 1 rolls around, right? You've seen the obvious connection between him and Rodgers in Pittsburgh. Maybe that's a move that the New York Jets make. What does the rest of this wide receiver room look like for the New York Jets? Does Malachi Corley play a role? What kind of role does Xavier Gibson play? What kind of role does Tyler Johnson play? You drafted Arian Smith on day number 3, a controversial draft pick. What does he look like when the season rolls around? So still a lot to comb through and figure out. But Rich Cimini yesterday in his weekly Sunday kind of news and notes dump article for ESPN revealed Josh Reynolds as the clear-cut favorite. And I want to throw this up here on the screen for the YouTube audience. This was the quote from Rich Cimini. Josh Reynolds is the clear-cut favorite for the wide receiver 2 job ahead of Allen Lazard, whose name will continue to circulate in trade rumors now that Rodgers has landed with the Steelers. If the Jets decide to move Lazard, a big if, it probably wouldn't be until the end of the preseason, but only if they're comfortable with their receiver depth. And that last part's key, right? The Lazard thing is a whole different story. We've covered the Lazard roster question a lot on this podcast, right? if that is going to get done, I do agree. I think that's something that if the Jets feel like they like the rest of this receiver room and feel like it's good enough without Lazard and they feel they want to move on, then they will do that. And that will be something that happens once they evaluate in the preseason and training camp. But Josh Reynolds is an interesting name because he's kind of flown under the radar. And the more you look into Josh Reynolds, the more it seems like he should be, and clearly, according to Rich Cimini here, is the favorite right now to be this number 2 wide receiver next to Garrett Wilson, right? Reynolds signed a 1-year deal with the team back in March. It's a $5 million deal, worth up to $5 million, I should say, with $2.75 million in guarantees. And before we really break down what Reynolds has done in the past and what he can bring here to this receiver room, and I just wanted to break down some analytics on him because I do think that some things that we could talk about Reynolds that should get you excited and confident in him if he ends up being this team wide receiver number 2. This is a guy that so far in minicamp and OTAs has had a solid offseason, I should say, especially in minicamp. Couple days, the first 2 practices there, had one of them was a touchdown when the Jets hit the red zone. He is a threat. He is a factor in the red zone as a bigger body, taller receiver who can go up and make the contested catch. Him and Fields had a connection going. So just right there, and I think Cimini mentioning Reynolds, I think kind of shows the type of offseason he's had. He's obviously got to carry it into training camp, but overall had a good start, in my opinion, to, I guess, the evaluation process prior to the season with a strong OTAs and a strong mini camp, had the touchdown. Fields was looking his way. They had that connection. Now you move into training camp. And when you look at just Reynolds' background in general, has a connection and has some experience with this offense, with Tanner Engstrand, with the Lions when he was there halfway through the 2021 season, and then spent all of 2022 and all of 2023 with the team and had 2 productive seasons in what I feel like will probably be similar to the role he will play this year as the number 2 wide receiver. Now, last season, it hit a little bit of a bump in the road. Was with Denver, then spent time with Jacksonville, dealt with some injuries, only appeared in 9 games, finished with 13 catches, 194 yards, and a touchdown. But if you go back to those 2 seasons with the Lions, those 2 full seasons, not counting when he came over in 2021 and only played 7 games. The 14 games played in 2022 and in the 17 games played in 2023. Across those 31 games, across those 2 seasons, he had 78 catches, 1,087 yards, and 8 touchdowns. And more importantly, when you look at where he ranked in targets on the team, I think you look at that ranking and you say that will be similar to what his role could be here with the Jets. In 2022, he was 3rd among wide receivers in targets, and he was 4th on the team. In 2023, he was 2nd among wide receivers in targets and 4th on the team. And I think that 2023 number there specifically is important because I think you look at the way this New York Jets team, this New York Jets offense could shape up to be is where your number 2 receiver is actually most likely your 4th most targeted player, right? A lot of times your number 2 receiver is going to be your number 2 or 3rd most targeted player, depending on the running back and the tight end. I think you look at the Jets and you say Reynolds, or it's going to go Garrett, number 1, far and away. He will have the most targets. He will be the number 1 guy. That's clear. Engstrand has mentioned it. Excited to see what they have in store for Garrett in terms of scheming him open, giving him some easier opportunities, really being the focal point in the offense. And then I would say Breece, number 2, and then Mason Taylor, I think, is going to play a large role. And then you look at Josh Reynolds as probably your 4th most targeted. And in that role, Reynolds can fit in, I think, just fine. You look at that 2023 season where he was the 2nd most targeted receiver and was 4th on the teams in targets, which could easily be the turnout this year. You look at that season, he had 40 catches, 608 yards, 5 touchdowns. That was a productive season. Josh Reynolds isn't elite. He's not a number 1. You're asking him to be a number 2. You're asking him to probably be potentially the fourth most targeted player on the team. So really, the fourth pass catcher in a way, in my eyes, will be behind Garrett Brees and even Mason Taylor. And in that role, I think there's potential there for him to be a nice complement and is the best option right now to be that complement to Garrett Wilson, because frankly, when you look at Josh Reynolds and you look at Allen Lazard, they're two very similar receivers. Reynolds is just better, though. They're two very similar receivers in their style of play, their length, what they're good at, what their strengths are. Reynolds' strengths, though, and weaknesses just outweigh where Lazard is. And when you look at the two, as your Z receivers, I thought there's a couple numbers here that I think stick out to me as just how much of an upgrade Reynolds really is over Lazard and why he is and should be the clear-cut favorite here for wide receiver number 2. Reynolds is 6'3", Lazard 6'5". I thought this was an interesting number. Since 2022, Reynolds has caught 17 of his 30 contested catches. That's 56.7%. Lazard, on the other hand, has caught 21 of 54, which is just 38.9%. So Reynolds' contested catch rate is almost 20% better than Lazard. And that's something that needs to improve with the Jets, especially when you look at the red zone, right? Throwing up that one-on-one ball where a tall physical receiver can come down with it. That's a huge piece. That's a huge, huge thing for this offense. If you can have a guy that can do that, Reynolds can do that and does it significantly better than what Lazard has done over the last 3 years. I also just think you look at some of these other numbers. Over the last 2 seasons, 2023, 2024, 26 games played between Reynolds and Lazard. They both played 26 games over the last 2 years, right? Reynolds' catch rate, 60.2%. Lazard's 55%. Yards per target, Reynolds 9.1, Lazard 7.7. Passer rating when targeted, Reynolds 109.2, Lazard 90. Drop rate, Reynolds at just 5.3%, Lazard at 17.8%. And snaps per penalty, Reynolds 285.8, Lazard just 121.4. Reynolds beats them in all those categories. I think the biggest thing you look at Reynolds is production isn't going to be sky high. He's not a 1,000-yard receiver. That's not what you're asking him to do. But is he consistent? Is he reliable? When you look at some of those advanced numbers, he's effective. He's efficient. And more efficient than these other options for the New York Jets, specifically Allen Lazard, who would really be the next man up at wide receiver number 2, most likely. Unless, of course, he gets dealt, which could happen if Reynolds really runs away with this. And the Jets like what they see in Arian Smith. And I have no faith, but maybe Malachi Corley has an amazing training camp, blows this coaching staff away, which I don't believe will happen. I don't even think there's guarantees on the roster, but who knows, right? But that's where things stand with Josh Reynolds. I also want to just throw these up one more time here. These are just Reynolds metrics here over the past 3 seasons. So I just read you some numbers over the past 2 years. Here's Reynolds over the past 3 years, which includes both of his most productive seasons in Detroit. 90-1 total receptions on 147 targets. That's a 61.9% catch rate. 1,281 yards. That's 8.7 yards per target. 9 touchdowns, the 6.1% touchdown rate. 65 first downs. That's 44.2%. 5 drops. That's just a 5.2% drop rate. We mentioned the contested catches earlier, right? 17 of 30. 12 missed tackles forced. 2 interceptions when targeted. Just 1.4% interception rate. And a 104.7 passer rating when targeted. Those stats are courtesy of Michael Nani of Jets X Factor. And actually, that last number there, the 104.7 passer rating when targeted, I think is interesting because that was actually higher than Josh Allen's 2024 NFL MVP passer rating of 101.4, which is just kind of throwing in a nugget. But again, those numbers prove efficient, And when you dig a little bit deeper, you can get behind Reynolds playing a role for this team, playing a bigger role for this team as really your fourth most targeted receiver, your fourth most targeted pass catcher. That's, I think, another thing, too, that I think people have to realize as well. Your Reynolds most likely isn't going to be number 2 on targets. I think he'll probably be number 4. And he played that role in Detroit in 2023 and played it well. I think you can look at this Jets offense and say, if he could play that role again and play it just as well, that's a plus on this 1-year contract for him. So those are my thoughts on Josh Reynolds and where things currently stand with him, what I thought was a good OTAs in minicamp, what I thought I liked the signing overall, I did. And what I think should be and is right there, right, according to Rich Cimini, the clear-cut favorite here for this New York Jets team to be the number 2 receiver. Doesn't have drops, doesn't have drop issues. That's been a problem for the Jets. He's going to catch the football. When you target him, when you give him opportunities, he's going to be efficient. He's going to make plays. He's not going to be flashy. He's not going to be elite. He's going to do what you need him to do as a number 2. So I think Josh Reynolds continues to be here, someone to look for as we roll on, especially into training camp, and how he can play a role here in this offense. So that's the Josh Reynolds stuff. Now I want to move on here to Aaron Glenn and just where things stand with him. And I've said this many times. I think Aaron Glenn so far has aced his first test as New York Jets head coach. And that really is since he's taken over in January to as we sit here on June 16th. I think he has passed every single test with flying colors. I think most of those tests have come by listening to the players speak about him, seeing the attendance during OTAs and minicamp, everybody showing up. You've got Sauce Gardner and Garrett Wilson, who could easily be sitting out, holding out for contract extensions, showing up because not only do they want to be leaders and examples in this locker room, but also because they have an early belief in Coach Glenn. And I wanted to play this clip here. It's a little bit of a longer clip, but I think it's from Zach Rosenblatt, who was speaking on just his thoughts so far on Glenn. And I think it really covers all angles of it. And then on the flip side, we'll discuss a little bit more. And then I want to get into a really interesting area of improvement that Glenn's looking for during training camp. So here's Rosenblatt.
But broadly speaking, I think the story of these few months has just been Aaron Glenn, the way he runs his program, kind of learning how he's going to go about it. And the way the players have responded to it. So that's kind of the biggest takeaways I've had. And it's a positive from my end. I've been impressed. Obviously, again, it's early. So this ultimate, if we get to week 3 and they're 0-3 and, culture's only good when you're winning ultimately. I know the best, you say the culture's good when you lose too, but everybody's culture looks great when you're winning and doesn't look so good when you're losing. The Bengals culture, the Bengals culture doesn't look great right now. They're coming off a losing season. If they were coming off a winning season or a season where they made the playoffs, then maybe all this drama they've had wouldn't be as big of a deal, but they look like a mess right now. So, but yeah, Aaron Glenn, I'm excited. I know you are too, because I saw you quote tweet me. I was when Steve Wilkes kind of hinted at the fact that they were going to do tackling in training camp, it perked my ears up a little bit because Salah's training camps, and he's not the only one. This isn't even to shit on Salah. The majority of training camps are really light these days. They do not do tackling really, and the tackling was a disaster for them last year, and that's probably not a coincidence. But even just looking at real hitting and intensity, I'm excited to see what that looks like. He made sure to say there's going to be a quick whistle. We have to make sure these guys know we're not trying to kill your teammates and stuff like that. But I'm looking forward to that, and that's kind of the general vibe. It was intense for a spring. It was still light practices broadly, but it was intense enough that Michael Carter after Thursday's practice was he was surprised that they did a more fun practice because so far it's been all about competing. So I've been encouraged by the Aaron Glenn of it all, and that's kind of the most important.
So that was Jets insider Zach Rosenblatt just on his takeaways and his thoughts on Glenn so far through OTA's minicamp. And even just the rest of the offseason. And he noted in there, right? And we've said this many times. At the end of the day, all that matters for Glenn and Muji is what they do on the field, wins and losses. And I totally agree with that. But for right now, there is no games. They can't win or lose right now. All we have is from January to June. And so far, he's past that. The Jets are grown. They're acting like grown adults right now. They're acting like a professional, competent football team. There's no drama. There's no noise. This has been one of the most quiet off seasons that I can remember in a very long time, especially over the last 2 years with all the Aaron Rodgers stuff, right? This time last year, we were dealing with the Rodgers in Egypt, Hassan Reddick holding out, that nonsense, no bombshell reports, none of that, right? The simple things the New York Jets have completed, which is good. They're acting like grown-ups. They're acting like a normal, well-oiled football operation, which does not happen often here, right? So that's that stuff. Now, I want to really get into the tackling point, and Rosenblatt mentioned it. And I think this is really, really important. And I actually wrote an article on this, and it'll be up here soon. So if you want to get some of my thoughts on this on paper, that'll be up as well in the Jet Press. So stay tuned for that. But I thought this was interesting because the whole tackling thing is very important to me. And I know it sounds obvious, right? Oh, you're going to practice tackling. And Glenn kind of hinted at that because he spoke about it on Thursday at his final minicamp press conference where he was like, he plans on, they know that they need to be a better tackling team. And he's like, it's a tackling sport. It's a tackling and blocking sport. In order to get better at it, you have to practice it. And that's obvious. But Rosenblatt mentioned, and just me as well, I've noticed this as well just the last couple of years with Salah going to the training camp practices. It was very, very light. There was no tackling. It's a lot of wrapping. And to be fair, that's a lot of it around the NFL, right? There's no more the two-a-days. There's no more. A lot of it is, right, they have to, there's honestly some rules and regulations that they have to follow during training camp with the amount of hitting and amount of practices and all that stuff that they can really do. So Glenn, of course, will do that within those boundaries, but just in general, you don't see much tackling. And I think it should lead to a more physical and, frankly, in my opinion, a more entertaining training camp. But I think it's so important that they are actually tackling and actually being physical, especially for this Jets team specifically, because this is a team that has been so soft, has been so bad at tackling these last couple years, especially last year, that it's pathetic. That they've gotten pushed around in all of these games, don't know how to tackle, terrible tackling technique. Only team in the NFL last year to have 2 games where they missed 20 tackles. Week 1 against San Francisco, and then later in the year when they got blown out 31-6 in Arizona, right? Both of those games, 20 tackles missed. Only team in the NFL to do that twice. It got so bad that Jeff Ulbrich had to show the team a tackling presentation. That's how bad it got. Clearly it didn't work, but that's how bad it got. And just in general, this has been a soft team. And I think it's been soft, part of the culture that Salah and Glenn and them built. It was a country club environment. There was no real, that's just what was there in that culture. And I mentioned so many times, there would be so many times I would go to training camp practices and I would walk away and kind of scratch my head at what they actually did. They were such light practices. There was no real intensity. There was no real physicality. It was a lot of just players feel like going through the motions. And I think that was a big part of the Jets getting beat up in a lot of these games, especially early on, where they came out slow. I just never think that this team would be ready for those games and be physically ready. They would come out soft, come out slow. I think a lot of that was Salah and just the way they ran things and the way they practice and those habits and even training camp, some of the slow starts they had in those seasons. Like, I think that all reflects on that. So I think it's going to be very important. I think it's a very important factor that they're actually going to be practicing tackling. And there's going to be more physicality. And that's got to change this team to be a physical team. That's what Glenn wants this culture to be. You might knock us down, but we're going to get back up. And on the way back, we're going to hit you a couple times, right? We're not going to give in. We're not going to give up. We're going to be physical. We're going to be a competitive football team. We're not going to go down easily. And all of that, I think, is going to be interesting to watch for in training camp. And just from the tackling perspective in general, just how bad the Jets were at tackling last year. I want to read you some numbers. They had a 42.5 PFF team tackling grade, which was tied for 24th in the NFL. As a team, they missed 162 tackles. That was actually 15 more tackles than they missed in 2023 when they missed 147. And they weren't a good tackling team in 2023, but they got worse last year. Now, where Glenn's coming from in Detroit, they've been the opposite. Even when they dealing with all those injuries last year, they were still a good tackling team. They finished with a 70.4 Pro Football Focus team tackling grade, which was third. And they missed 33 less tackles than the Jets. And that was a team that dealt with injuries all of last year. That wasn't the case for the Jets. They sucked in many areas, including tackling, and not just defense. We know they sucked on offense, and we know their coaching staff was horrible. Wilkes has even mentioned it, the importance of the guys in the secondary being more physical, stepping up and making tackles, finishing plays. That's important because the secondary had some tackling issues last year as well, Sauce included. But even some of the safeties, that's an area Jets have got to be better in. Wilkes notices it. Glenn notices it. Physical training camp coming up. And I wanted to read one more other thing too here, and we'll close things out just on the importance of tackling. And I thought this was interesting. So NFL.com released their top. They ranked every team from a tackling perspective, and they used a couple different things to rank them. They used next-gen stats. They added up the grades, tackling efficiency, and they ranked teams based on best tackling team and worst. So the best tackling team in the NFL was the Chiefs, and the Browns graded out as the worst at 32nd. The Jets were 30th, and the Lions, Glenn's former defensive coordinator, right, was 5th. I thought this was interesting. I think this shows you just how important it is, how much tackling matters. Out of the 14 playoff teams last year, the teams that ranked in the top half of the league in tackling, so 1 through 16, 12 teams, 12 of those 16 teams made the playoffs. 75% of the playoff teams ranked within the top 16 teams in tackling. The only team that missed the playoffs that ranked in the top 16 was the Cowboys, Patriots, Seahawks, and Bengals. Now, the teams that ranked in the bottom half of the league, only 12.5% made the playoffs. Out of 16 teams, the bottom 16 teams in the NFL in tackling, only 2 made the playoffs. That was the Buccaneers, who ranked 17th, and the Texans, who ranked 21st. So the point I'm trying to make here is, and the point that's clear, good tackling teams make the playoffs. Bad tackling teams don't. Physical teams do. Soft teams don't. Jets were a soft team. They were a bad tackling team. They won 5 games. Improve on that. Get better at that starting in training camp. And you can put together a much more competitive and successful season than what this team has the last couple years. Let's change that during training camp. That's Glenn's goal. So I wanted to close with that because I think that's interesting. I think that's something that does need to be noted and is important, in my opinion, when looking at this team and the outlook on the season, is that improved tackling and just becoming a more physical and competitive football team than where they've been. So that'll do it. Episode 556 in the books. Appreciate you all so much. The support is awesome, and I can't thank you all enough. So thank you so much. Appreciate it. We'll be back. A lot more content coming your way here the rest of the week. We continue to wait on Garrett Wilson, Sauce Gardner extensions. We've got some other things that I want to discuss as well. So we'll break it all down here as we roll on and get closer each day, get closer to training camp. So stay tuned. A lot more content coming your way. What are your thoughts on Josh Reynolds, wide receiver number 2? Your thoughts on Aaron Glenn's first test with the Jets? Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. And until next time, Jets, Jets, Jets.